Welcome to The Light Continues. I'm your host, Teresa Concepcion, and if you don't know, now you know. Eagles, baby. How about them Eagles? Fly, Eagles, fly. All right, so welcome back to The Light Continues. I am back from a hiatus, and we are switching up the format a little bit of The Light Continues podcast. And I am now going to be on video, so you can download this podcast on Spotify, soon to be available everywhere you get your podcasts, and now also on YouTube video. So today's episode I am dedicating to Mix 106.5 morning show magic professional couple Kramer and Jess. They are my all-time favorite morning show. If you live in the Baltimore area and you listen to Mix 106.5, you know exactly who I'm talking about and why I think they are so special. Kramer is a funny guy who's early 40s, vegan, single. Jess is a married chick in her 30s and regularly eats chicken at Chili's. And they balance each other out really well. They have great energy in the morning. They, for me, fit that balance of not being too energetic and not being too boring, which is pretty hard to do. And they always have very interesting guests throughout the week that I think, like, in and of themselves, like, those guests would make an hour-long radio show, like, really interesting. But of course, because they're limited to having segments for only a few minutes, there's a lot of things that are left unsaid at these, segments. And so this week, I decided I was going to do an episode, like, basically saying what I would have said on Kramer and Jess for a couple of reasons, right? First of all, try as I might, I can never get in on Kramer and Jess when I try to call. So I have become like a text message queen on the show, right? So like anytime some crazy person is saying whatever, I'm texting on their text hotline and constantly interacting with them, and then wishing that I, had a bigger audience than the folks on the show side reading my text. And then another thing that I keep seeing come up as a repetitive pattern is people obviously having issues with their significant others and relationships, or people having issues with their extended families. And usually in the extended family region, those issues tend to have a lot to do with boundaries, right? Like our in-laws respecting boundaries of new spouses, or our siblings respecting boundaries of new families, which I always think is really interesting. But this past week, there were two episodes in particular that caught my attention, and it was killing me that I couldn't get through to, say anything or make a contribution to the conversation. And one of the scenarios, right, I think has a lot to do with, number one, relationships, but number two, and I think more fundamentally, it has to do with self-worth and what you value yourself at before you even get into the calculation of how you add or subtract to or with another person. You have to start from the basic premise of self-worth. And there was this one scenario this week where, to me, it felt like the woman who was calling with a question didn't have a lot of personal self-worth. And I felt like that would have been something that, had time allowed, would have been worth exploring. So the scenario this week is this woman is engaged. I'm just going to go alphabetically. Her name is Abby. Her boyfriend is Brian. And so Abby found out that her boyfriend Brian took $1,200 from a shared savings account. Abby said that money was supposed to go towards their wedding. He said it was just savings, but regardless, it was their funds. And Brian lent $1,200 to his ex-girlfriend, who we'll call Carly. And because Carly was about to be evicted because she was short on her rent. Legal side note, you don't get evicted just for missing 1 month or 2 months or even 3 months rent. So the urgency of it to me as an attorney is somewhat questionable, but let's pretend that she was on the brink of eviction and she really needed $1,200 imminently. Brian takes the money without telling his woman and gives it to the ex, hides it, lies about it, and then when she finds out, instead of like out and out apologizing, he goes and says, well, it's not a big deal and it isn't worth me cutting this ex out, right? So God bless him. Kramer is very understanding for a guy, and he's like, well, I can see that this guy's heart was in the right place, yada yada. And a lot of other people, were calling in and saying that they did or did not think that this guy Brian should be cutting his ex out of his life permanently. And what I would have said had I been able to call in on this show is, girl, Abby, there are very few times in life where God gives you the opportunity to act like Neo in the Matrix, but you just dodged a bullet, if you choose to dodge it, right? Because you have someone who lied to you, who stole from you, who gave your money to another person with whom he has had sexual intercourse. And then he gaslighted you by telling you that it actually wasn't as big a deal. And none of those things that he did should result in the consequence of him severing a relationship with somebody when he's already put that other person ahead of you. This is not about whether you need to continue your relationship on the condition of him cutting her out. This is about you wondering why it is, after everything that I just laid out, you feel like this is someone who is still worthy of your time and attention and love and dedication and future investment, right? He's not. And so the real issue is not him at all, actually, because I very much doubt that this is the first time in your relationship where you have been belittled, lied to, and then made to feel like you are the crazy person for feeling things that are actually very justified, right? Things like this don't just happen out of the blue. They tend to happen as part of a pattern. And so what I would want to say to you and to any person is that I too have been in situations where you feel like you're the lucky one, that someone is able to love you despite A, B, C, D, E, F, G flaws, right? And you feel like you are so fortunate that you have to be willing to tolerate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different levels of disrespect, because that's the trade-off to finding somebody who loves you. And it's not the case. And my hope and my wish for every woman and every person listening to this and questioning whether or not they really are worthy of someone who can truly give them unconditional love. Number one, the answer is yes. But number two, Jess on Kramer and Jess is the perfect example of somebody whose relationship is very healthy and very, I think, attainable if you value yourself enough to know what you deserve, right? Anybody who listens to Kramer and Jess knows I'm not blowing up her spot, but Jess has overactive bladder, okay? The girl is constantly stressed about peeing. As a matter of fact, in her engagement video that she posted when her fiance, now husband Gerald, aka Garage Boy, proposed to her, there was this adorable moment where they're like in the middle of her living room. There's flower petals and candles and people from the family like everywhere, and she's freaking out. And she says, "Oh my God, I think I'm gonna pee." And they look at each other, and then at the exact same time, they're like, "You're not gonna pee." Like, he's talking to her and she's talking to herself. Like, she's like, "I'm not gonna pee." And I saw that and I was like, that is the goal. Find someone who loves you so much that they can talk you through your overactive bladder anxiety without making you feel embarrassed about it, but just accepting that as part of the whole package. And I mean that to say, like, there are healthy ways of having unconditional love for somebody, and there are unhealthy ways of having unconditional love for somebody. You know, loving somebody despite any physical or medical or whatever imperfections is healthy and much more, desirable than loving somebody unconditionally despite how many times and how many ways they disrespect you. Right? There's a difference. And there's a difference in when you should be ready to pull the plug on someone who doesn't value you the way that you should be valuing yourself, right? So that would have been my response to that scenario. If I were talking to Abby about Brandon and why he was wrong for everything he did on the side with Carly, I would say, listen, the issue is not whether or not you move forward so long as he cuts this person out. My thing is, he has already shown you why you need to turn around and leave and cancel this wedding and find someone who's truly worthy of you. And do you value yourself enough to take that step? That's the real question. And so that was one thing that I wanted to share. The other one that I wanted to share that I thought was really interesting last week was about family boundaries, right? And this one was a little bit of a crazy scenario, but let's again keep going down alphabetical order. Diane is a sister who had diabetes. Diane with diabetes went to her, I think it's a nephew or niece, whatever, first year birthday party thrown by her sister Ellen. And Ellen's kid was 1. So Ellen's kid is not going to remember the birthday. This is really a beef between Diane and Ellen, because Diane showed up at Ellen's house unprepared, even though she is a lifelong diabetic, and was starting to have a blood sugar issue. And rather than either notify someone else at the party or eat, there had to have been candy, cupcakes, sodas, juices, anything else at this party. The freaking sister, Diane, decided to cut a slice from the first, the 1-year-old birthday cake and eat that to prevent a diabetic episode. And then it's the sister Diane calling to be like, I think she overreacted. So I think at first, because the episode segment is called Forgive and Forget, right? So I think at first this Diane chick was like, I want an apology because my sister overreacted because she said I'm no longer invited to any family birthday parties because I took a slice of this cake because, oh my God, I'm having this diabetic shock. And then the sister came on the phone, Ellen, and she's like laying it out. And she's like, listen, you have been a lifelong diabetic and you always do this. You are always unprepared. You always make a scene. You're always overly dramatic. And you always have to solve your problem in a way that creates the most attention for you and detracts from whatever else is going on, right? And I think that not too many people who called in and who had an opinion, like, really got with that sister, Ellen. And so I wanted to, and I wanted to say, I think boundaries in families, number one, is just a huge issue. I think, obviously, especially I think in first generation immigrant families, there's a lot of deference given to elders. There's a lot of, respect and a lot of feeling on the part of children that they have to live their lives for their parents. And in other families, there's varying degrees of that, right? There's varying degrees of how much do I get to prioritize my own needs versus the needs of other family members when they have their own things going on. And so I thought that this call was actually a really good example of having clear, firm boundaries because, again, it's less about the other person and more about what is the responsibility that you have to take for yourself. What is the level of responsibility that you owe to yourself, and what is the level of respect that you owe to others that you show by being responsible for yourself? Like, as much as you need help sometimes, and of course there are going to be times when you need to rely on your family and you reach out to them and you ask them for help, and hopefully it's a situation where they're able to help you and return help that you've provided in the past. Like, it should be a quid pro quo, but there should never really be a situation where your needs are essentially like taking advantage of the family that you've decided to surround yourself with. And so when I was thinking about what life lessons could we take away from this week's episodes of, Kramer and Jess in the morning, having healthy boundaries, communicating healthy boundaries, and having the respect for others by properly caring for yourself, I think are things that are kind of glossed over in any kind of dialogue that happens today. And so, in today's society, there is just so much negativity. There are so many terrible, horrible things happening. But in this podcast, my hope is that I help encourage you to continue pushing forward with your light, with your positivity, with your ambitions, with your goals. And one of the ways that you can really do that is by asking yourself, how can I make sure that I'm good? Because when I'm good, that means that I have to impose less on others. And how can I value myself to make sure that other people don't unnecessarily, inappropriately impose on me? Remember that you are the only person who owes yourself everything that you've got. And so make sure that you're loving yourself, make sure you're treating yourself in a way that's respectful of you, and make sure others are treating you in the way that you want to be treated, and vice versa. So this was The Light Continues, what I would have said this week on Kramer and Jess. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.